Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Rijon Erickson, and we have only met in the last week. And so I'm excited to get to know you. And so tell us a little bit about yourself um, and just see where our conversation can go from that.
Which story? Thank you, and I'm pleased to be here and um, in grace with you in this moment.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I pause with that question because there's each of us have so many different stories we tell, and the story I tell has changed through the years, and it changes almost each day.
Mhm.
Um, I think I'll go with the I'm a musician. And
Oh,
I, I grew up, and I'm a musician not in the way that you think of it. I born in West Terre Haute, Indiana. Born in Terre Haute, Indiana. Lived in West Terre Haute. My my pop, as you can, I don't know if we're doing this on video as well, but
yes.
my pop did this print for me in honor of my musicianship. He was a professor of printmaking and drawing, Indiana State University, for 30 odd years. And thus, I grew up in and around the university environment. And I was very fortunate in my very early years be introduced to music. And we learned how to play cornet in first grade. And very soon after just even learning how to play, the band director, Judith E. Grimes, she taught us how to improvise. Or at the very basic level. So at this first grade, just playing cornet, we would improvise with just one note. Play blues scale eventually, but that concept of improvising and freedom and musicianship, that kind of it was it went deep fast. So I took that musicianship through school and years of school, ended up going to college for music, for jazz studies major, Bowling Green State University, Bowling Green, Ohio. And at the end of that time, college, life changed as it often happens, it always happens. I met my wife in college and we got pregnant senior year of college. Um, Lost the baby. My God, I can't believe I'm going here right away. Um, but life changed, right? So I was going to be this musician where I was going to go live in the world and be live that life, but then life invited a different choice. So music went from in my hands and screaming it out into the world and went into my heart. And we settled in Cincinnati, which is where we are now, after 8 years in Charlotte. And I embarked on a 25-year career in IT to pay the bills and be in technology, and then ended, and after that period of time, 25 years, utility company, IBM, doing also project management, business analysis, software stuff at varying scales and types like that. I I ended up with cancer in 2019 after a long period of time. And that facing cancer at that time, a few years ago, um, changed a lot about the way I view the world and what's important in the world and how I wanted to navigate the world. And after after treatment and kind of into remission and recovery, I came to a place in myself that I wanted to go deep with everything I did and in this philosophical depth. And that led me to return to what would it be if in the world of work, in this world of doing work together in organized effort, what if it were more like making music instead of building machines, you know? And that metaphor, it kind of started to feel more and more true as I've progressed on, that it's about when we play as musicians, as professionals, when we come to play, that's our business, right? We're playing, we're doing it, we're here, it's important, we're performing, we're giving love and receiving love in relationship and all this kind of, there's almost too many human concepts about music and musicianship that relate to organizational life and being with each other that are transcendent. And to bring it back in this moment, who am I? Why am I here? What do I want? And I want to bring that loving spirit of music to the world of work. And if I'm going to be here doing work, I want to do it the way I would have done it as a jazz musician. And
So,
so
would you,
that's a circuitous route, but that's kind of
no,
where
no,
I am
no,
at the
that's
moment.
it's very straightforward. So, would you say, if you look at the whole extent of your life, that you began along a path and then you took a really long detour in order to get back to the path that you really wanted to be on?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
In a sense that you began your life in a particular on a particular path, and then
Yeah.
you took a long detour and you've returned to that path.
Yeah.
Is that path um, something where music is central to that, or is it what lies underneath what we know as music, the infrastructure of music that is um, what is has got a
I-
hold of you now?
Is it literal or metaphorical? I think that's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the
or both.
it is it's well, I mean, I show you my bass here and I've come back to it. I mean, I'm not a professional player anymore. I don't play for money anymore. Didn't really play a lot. So it's this metaphorical, yeah. I mean, it's identity. It is who
Uh-huh.
I am and choose to be. It's not in my hands anymore the way it was, but it's in my heart.
Right.
So using that language, and I think it's a way of communicating with people using that metaphor. That's a pretty easy metaphor to get with, making music together, dancing to the music, if you feel that. And but for me and in my practice as an individual in the world, it's about that music beyond the sounds we make with instruments is the music that you and I are making together in this space, in this place, and this conversational music. And is it jazz? Is it classical music? Is it country western? Is it heavy metal? Is it a garage band? Is it, whatever? That's that's how I use that metaphor and bring it forth.
Couple of things. Who You're a bass player, so is there something about bass playing that distinguishes this from, say, the rhythm guitar or a horn player or a pianist? Is there, because I like bass players. I marvel at bass players. I mean, I'm thinking about Jaco Pastorius and Dave Holland and Eugene Wright and people who have covered the entire spectrum of jazz over the last century. Uh,
Yeah.
Does that play into that? Is there something about bass playing that makes you all different than the other players?
Well, that's I think so. And there's I haven't really intellectualized it as much that would just in terms of how am I playing bass in this group? What is it to be this? I'm supporting maybe I kind of have, but you're supporting the harmony and the rhythm and the melody at the same time. And occasionally, as you know, in a jazz trio, which is kind of like the perfect form of that,
Hmm.
occasionally the bass player takes solo. Maybe not, but be there as this you know it when it's not there,
Yeah.
right? So it yeah. I,
So
hmm.
let me
Yeah. So
go
so
one,
so so
go one step.
yes, and
Uh, the bass player, in a certain sense, is like a metronome, keeping everybody on pace throughout the song, and so that you arrive at the end all together.
mhm.
And that's my perception. I'm not a musician. That's my perception of what bass players do.
Very interesting. And when I have these conversations with folks, again, when we talk about music, and almost inevitably, oh, I'm not a musician. That those words come out, and then no, you really are. If we
Okay,
think about what we're doing. No, but I mean, that are
I'm
you an
not an
instrumental
instrumentalist.
musician? Yeah. So I mean, whatever it is, but I think that that's interesting to say. But what is the rhythm that we have in our conversation? Is it a smooth rhythm? Are we kind of trying to feel where we are at this point? If I'm picking up the bass in this conversation and I'm saying I'm I'm stewarding the tempo, right? I may not be in control of the tempo. I mean, each of us as a trio would we negotiate the tempo. And I think metronome is an interesting thing to say because there's a lot of guys in music say no, metronomes will they kill the spirit, right? It's like this
Right?
just drum machine, they kill the spirit. So I don't practice with the metronome. Tempo is an agreement, right? And
Mhm.
I think in that's it's negotiated in that, oh, but if you got a good sense of time, you've got big ears, you can hear the tempo, you can feel it. I see it in your eyes, and that's not that is a universal concept. That's not just it becomes very vivid when we have it in our hands and in our ears, but it is what is the pace? What's the melody that's happening here? Are we having a very a bombastic conversation? Are we in with 40 people and everyone's in this Discord? What is that? And what is my role in it? And I think that's an important conversation to have in any kind of group work. And to know what am I owning in this group and what part of this interaction am I owning and where do I take, where do I give, and how do I share in that? And that's musical literally and it's musical, metaphorically.
The reason I say what I said is because I love music, and I particularly love jazz, and I particularly love the classic jazz of Django through the kind of the mid '70s. You know,
Yeah.
we're into the '80s, and I got to the privilege of seeing the Modern Jazz Quartet on their last tour,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it remains with me one of the seminal experience of my life because I'm sitting there watching these four men play, and I realize they're talking to each other through their instruments.
Mhm.
And it was an insight about communication that has stayed with me. And so I see like the bass player and the drummer as creating um, an environment for the who are the people that are normally projected as the stars, the horn players and
Mhm.
the pianists and or in the case of the MJQ, it's the vibraphone. They're the ones who are seen as the leaders of the band
Mhm.
when it's really the guys in the background who really are leading it and just providing an environment for the stars to exert their very best selves in the moment.
And this is the interesting piece. I think we talk about what does it mean to lead and follow, and does it really matter? Are we talking about, well, I'm leading you, I'm going here, come with me because I'm going over there.
Yeah.
Or because in a musical stem, yeah, so the person is, you got the melody, right? So this person's, their job, its ownership is to sing, whether it's a singer, sax player, whatever, to sing the song. But each of us in ensemble are taking responsibility for where this thing goes.
Yeah.
And in that, this idea of leading with or being with, it kind of, that when it's, you talk about music, and I guess, and literally, you know it when you see it,
Yeah.
that kind of that leading ship, or there are a lot of folks who write wonderfully about this, but it is, I think this whole power with, that the idea of a traditional leader being, I have the power, I have the authority, I'm respect me, respect my authority, and follow me wherever I go. And in music, it's fundamentally different. It is fundamentally different. Uh, in and we could have a discussion about why that's
Unless,
fundamentally different, but
unless you're Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, or John Coltrane.
well, Miles is a great example. How if we see Miles, yeah, he'll turn his back to the audience, and at point when he was playing bebop, he was playing a melody, he was doing the bebop thing, but then as he progressed in time, eventually when you went to a Miles Davis concert, you didn't hear much of Miles playing the trumpet. You heard the band, and he was convening that band, and they were with each other. And then, what does it mean to be a musical leader, for lack of a better term? You know,
It's a good question. My understanding of all this changed last fall. I moved back to my hometown, Winston-Salem,
Mm. Yeah.
and I returned to the church of my birth, the church I grew up in. And
Mm.
and we have an academic musicologist who is our
Mm.
music director at church. And so I joined the choir.
Yeah.
It was one of the most difficult things I've ever done because I don't read music. And it's been really hard, but because he's throwing really sophisticated stuff. I mean, we've done some 6-part choral pieces. We did a Mendelssohn oratorio at Christmas. I mean that, but and I think this is where I want to actually take this is that we those of us who are not musically trained and who really only know what we hear, and we don't even know what we're hearing, but we like what we know what we like and what we don't like. Okay, so that's kind of the bare minimum. Um, but I think a lot of us feel like music is the notes on the page, and it's the structure and the order and the melodies and it's all of that, shall I say, kind of an abstract superstructure. When in reality, and this is what I learned by singing,
Mhm.
it's something that's a totally embodied experience. So what do you think of that?
I think you're you, that. that the notes written on the page, it's a pale imitation of what happens in the air, in the spirit, in the body, in the mind, in the heart. Um, and this is that's that's beautiful, and I think that's also when you talk about formal training, right?
Hmm.
to I need to know how to read and write music, and I need to know all my, like for jazz musician, the level's even higher. You have to know how to improvise in every key and all this kind of stuff, and that takes a level of dedicated practice to be a professional to do that. And even if you're not a reader necessarily, but definite practice. But all that practice is for the purpose of releasing from that,
Hmm.
so that you can transcend, the four strings and the electricity and all this stuff, so that you can actually feel it in your heart, and when it's coming out of your voice. And I want to ask a bit about how the rehearsal process was, and what that space was like when you entered into it, and how you came to it. But it totally hits. Music, it's not about the notes. It's not about, and this is, and there's one little metaphor I want to take before I
Hmm.
dive into your experience, is that I detest trying to communicate with people in writing in real time, like texting or
Oh yeah,
communicating, God forbid, on social media,
yeah.
on social media and all that kind of stuff, that you have to be really in understanding and in a place of grace and assuming good intent about the other person, as opposed to, because it can go left in a second. But when you and I are speaking together, and that you feel discord, I see something in your eyes, I see something in your body, then we can have some breath and understanding, and we're sharing an experience. We're not just, you know, killing the spirit of the words, putting them on the page, and then shoving them at somebody.
Right.
And that's this whole idea of the me. It's perfect. The music is not on the page, right? The music is in space. It's the unspeakable part of this relationship. Um, yeah. So I'll hold if you want to
There's
come back on
there's
that.
another way of describing this, and it is the map is not the terrain.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a philosopher, he's deceased now, but I had a brief encounter with him named Albert Borgman, taught at the University of Montana. And he wrote a book called, I can't come up with it right off the top of my head, but he was writing about information. And he was writing about different types of information. One of those he was writing about was music.
Mm.
And 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 I think it was him who commented on this. He said that the way music has functioned in our world has changed over the years. Um, 200 years ago or 300 years ago, music was what it was played. It was written, it was written and played. And once it was played, it was gone. You could replay but every time you replay it, it was be different. And before there was ever notation, uh, music notation, and there,
The aural, AURAL tradition of
yes.
music.
And he says, and then what happened was the performance became important rather than the individual's playing of an instrument, than the
Mm.
performance. And then the electronic age came, and the recordings of those, and um, and it's interesting. Um, there's a I'm a I'm a subscriber to the Berlin Philharmonic channel, and they have
Mm.
a set of historic. they have a channel of videos of capturing their history as an orchestra. And one of those is a three-part series on the orchestra in the 20th century. And they talk about what, and I think it was them, maybe it was one of the members of the orchestra in one of their interviews, but they're talking about how how conductors crafted the performance of a say a Beethoven symphony, and that there were differences between from large differences from composer to I mean from conductor to conductor.
Hmm.
Then when the recording era came and the video, I mean the capturing it on film, then things became
Hmm.
much more standardized. And I thought that was really interesting. So you can find some of these ancient recordings of some of these symphonies that were recorded way back when, and you can hear. I mean, you can hear, particularly if they've been remastered well. You can really can hear the differences, and they're looking at the different parts of the orchestra differently from conductor to conductor, and it is one of and for a leadership guy, I think about so you have a leader coming into an organization, and they're going to see the parts of that organization in a particular way, and they're going to emphasize the parts that they feel like need to be elevated because of where the company is at this moment in time.
Yeah.
Then they leave, and a new person comes in, and they're going to change that, and they're going to look at, oh, we're going to elevate the horns instead of elevate the violins. I mean, and so it does have this kind of metaphorical tie to what leadership is and what leaders do in organizations. I still haven't
And
answered your question, but
no, but that's really where I like to go with it because it's the the idea of there being a singular point of control for even in an orchestra, hundreds of people, 100, 150 folks in a big, Mahler symphony or whatever, um, that it is an illusion and a toxic kind of illusion to think that the person on the podium is really in control. And that is that sense of yes, there's somebody's got to say what somebody's got to start the tune and we have to know what tune we're playing. What is are we playing Beethoven's Fifth? Are we playing Stockhausen? Are we playing God only know what are we playing? Are we trying? Yeah, so they're the notes on the page. And yes, there's a person on the stand who's and like trying to think of like Stokowski, right? The Leopold in the New York, he was like that, very that, and then you've got say Ben Zander. I think was he in Boston? He was like New England Conservatory guy, but it
he
very
was
fully. But
in New England. Yeah, I think he was more of an academic, though. But maybe I don't
it,
know.
and I think this is if again taking it like at a macro level in terms of uh, the idea of centralized control is becoming so detrimental to human thriving, I think, in the way that that happens institutionally, right?
Yeah.
And but if we think about the orchestra model, have you ever heard of the Orpheus Chamber Ensemble?
I'm sure I have. I've listened to a lot of music.
They're the only conductorless orchestra in the world. So it's very interesting to see how they put performances together and how they shift the authority of who's going to decide what to play and how they navigate the sections. And I think that it's worth considering that that the role of the person on the podium is is changing,
Yeah.
and is and it because if you think about each section of the first like 15 first violins, 15 second violins, and all this, that each of those people, they're not, yeah, maybe they're playing the same kind of role in the music of your organization, but the needs are different. Each of those individual needs are different. And this kind of, it is no longer um, good for that that violinist to just play the notes and bowings like I told you. You know, do it that way and do it that way. Um, and this that comes into, what have the conductors learned about the music of their organization as they go forward, to be able to, how much control of that performance do they relinquish? How much did they own as a conductor? How much how much do they invite to come forth from the ensemble? And I think that's a conversation that I would like to have with more and more folks.
Um, there's a story out there. I've heard it several times, and I don't remember which conductor it was. But the story is about this conductor who, for some reason, had become rather abusive towards the orchestra. And I forget what piece of music they were getting ready to play, but it was a performance. And he went to start, and they refused to start. And it took him back, and then he did it again, and they started. But they did, but the story is that they did that to remind him who's in charge.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the sense, maybe the conductor is more like a bass player.
In a way that they are part of the music, right? When you've got that many people, I mean, and that I think is where the music metaphor becomes really interesting,
Yeah.
in that, because if 10 jazz quartets at the same time, um, that's they need to be in different venues.
That'd be
they're,
concomitants. Yeah.
yeah. And that if you got 150 people playing together, there really needs to be a deep sense of synchronicity between those sections. And if there is no conductor, then it is really a very serious responsibility for each section, each player, to be totally attuned into the music and the synchronization and all that kind of stuff. If you got that many people, you know, um,
So we have about 25 to 30 in our choir, and we have enough for um, first and second sopranos, alto, first and second tenor, and bass. We have all that. We have that numbers. Michael Dodds is our music director, and he was a guest on the podcast last summer, late last summer, and we talked music theory then. That was really interesting.
oh, I've got to hear that one.
So what he does, if it's a new piece, a lot of these people have been singing for 10, 15 years. So the pieces they've sung before they know. And so sometimes we'll just sing through the piece, then we'll go back and we'll look at pieces. Sometimes he'll start with a section of the piece, that's three-quarters of the way through, and he says, "Let's start here." And there have been occasions at rehearsal where he'll do that, and that's all we'll do of that piece, and then we'll come back to
Mhm.
it the next week, and it's a remarkable experience, uh, and he's totally open to advice, and so we have people who we have some professional singers in the choir, and some who are not professional singers, but they're of that level, um, because they've been trained. And and they'll raise their hand and say, well, "What about this?" Here he says, "Oh yeah, that's really good." Okay, and he takes his pencil and he's making a notation on his score. And so we're changing things. You know, a lot of that has to do with breaths and pauses and things like that. But it's a wonderful experience. It is.
I I I really love this. I mean, that is this idea of someone who really knows the ensemble, right?
Yeah.
And you've got a real on so you have some folks in these, it's like 30 folks. I think it's a perfect example too. Some of the thing are professionals, right? I would imagine there's some who are again amateurs, not formally
Right.
trained, I'm
Right.
guessing.
Right.
There are some who are not formally trained who've been experienced in the ensemble for a while that there are different levels of talent, different timbres of each voice, and all this kind of and again to have a conductor or a music director, right? That role will change depending on, I would imagine you probably through time had people enter and exit the chorus as well, different membership maybe.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So there is probably a school of thought that the music director would be, this is the way we sing this tune. You are going to sing it this way and do it that way. It sounds like Michael is not this kind of person.
Oh, he isn't.
So, and that kind of sensitivity and that willingness to be who the music needs you to be and to be who the ensemble needs you to be. That's not just a conductor's responsibility or music director's. Just it is every instrument. Again, the voice is your instrument, right? Every instrumentalist has a responsibility to bring their music to that ensemble to have that unique performance. And and that performance, I mean, it's magic in the moment and that comes out of people. And I think that's a great and the performance changes on the venue, the performance changes with the audience, and all those kinds of things. So I could talk about that for hours. So
Well, here's another facet of it, and I'm curious what you think. Um, this is obviously a church, which is so it's a community of faith, and we come out of we come with a spiritual context to our life. And if you ask people what that means, it's hard to describe what that means. I mean, they want to feel like they're in the presence of God. Okay, that may be one way they describe it. But for others, it has the flavor of being kind of a set of moral constructs that govern their life. I'm a spiritual person because I live an ethical, moral life by faith. But it's not the same. And the trick, I think, the tricky thing is that it's way too much defined by the words we use.
yeah,
And I would say that music, singing music or playing music, particularly in a congregational environment, it may be the most spiritual thing that you can do because it's the most embodied thing that you do um, as a person of faith. Sitting in the sanctuary, listening to a sermon and doing the liturgy, that's important. I'm not denigrating that at all. But it's when you sing the music and the words, and it requires your entire body to be elevated to bring all that together in some kind of sublime way.
absolutely. It makes it somatic, and it is, and it's that embodiment of yeah, it being. And I don't even know the etymology of it and can the background, but this word ensemble, being in an ensemble with each other, and that we are, yeah, we're singing the same words. Yeah, the structure of the words are the same, but the fact that we are singing it together and the togetherness is it is exponentially more powerful. And I think it is almost, and you mentioned that sublime part of it, is that it's it's like whistling about fish, that kind of thing. It's
It's, it's
you can't
not
do
just,
it.
and it's not just church music. It's all music.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the experience that many young girls get when they go to see Taylor Swift. They're having a
Yeah.
spiritual experience. It may not be,
Yeah.
they may not be able to articulate that in the kinds of ways that older people would, but they're having a spiritual experience about something that validates who they are, and they feel elevated, they feel loved, they
Joy. It's
feel joy.
joyful. It's joyful. I owe this phrase to a friend of mine in Germany, Manai Kiela, and joyful togetherness. How much more, what
Like that term.
higher aim would there be than joyful togetherness?
I um I haven't been to a lot of concerts in my lifetime because I've lived in too many cases in rural areas where I just didn't have access.
Yeah.
I I have seen, well, I mentioned the Modern Jazz Quartet. I got to see Freddie Hubbard play once.
Yeah.
I was sitting um, about 4 feet away from him, and it's like watching an Olympic athlete perform.
Yeah.
And um, I got to see the Vienna Philharmonic. It's not that I don't think that. Yeah, anyway, that's I saw them in Vienna. You know,
Wow.
in Vienna's, you know, as far as classical music goes, it's the center.
Yeah.
And the and you could talk about Brahms and you could talk about Beethoven, you can talk about Mozart there, but the Strauss family really is the predominant. Okay, I'm leading to something.
Yeah.
So when I went to see them, they played they had this fantastic French cellist play the Shostakovich cello concerto.
Yeah.
Can't remember his name, but what they did play, and just think about the setting of Vienna, they played Strauss's Alpen Symphony,
Mm.
which surrounds that city, the Vienna woods, and it was a remarkable experience of visually seeing what Strauss was feeling inside of him that he wanted to express in terms of this symphony about the mountains. And it was
Mm.
it was a but you see, I think these things are really important for us, and I think the more music we hear and more music we listen to, the more you and I wish I had learned to play. I took trumpet in fourth grade,
Mm.
but it just didn't allow me to go in that direction.
What, so, and this is part of what I'd like to explore with the folks in coaching and who are in various levels of authority about that. Um, you played for a bit and then something happened. What was it that changed, that where music left your hands and your body, and where did it go? Was it a teacher? Was it a circumstance? For you, Eddie, I mean, how did that happen? If you
Um,
can recall.
yeah, it was. I changed schools. From I played trumpet in fourth grade, and fifth and sixth grade I was at a different school, and it just the idea of playing the horn just never reemerged, and I got interested in other things, and but I didn't lose my interest in music.
And this is because now, I mean, we're talking about music, and I can see there's this deep love and diversity of music, and I mean, you're singing in the choir now, and I think this also ties into formalized education as well, and industrialized education that we've
Sure.
seen, is that that training kind of kills the spirit of music in a lot of kids. That the kids who grew up, and my wife's a great example, and she grew up playing French horn. People thought she was good at it, and then they said, you need to do this in order to go farther. And then she couldn't quit it fast enough. And there are many
Became an
kids that
obligation.
pardon?
It became an obligation.
An obligation and an imposition on who she wanted to be. That this is not my identity, but people are forcing me to do that. And that so many you hear how many kids you hear like, oh, I took piano lessons for a while, but I couldn't wait to stop. Right? That's not what music education ought to be about. You know, I think that, and I think the love of learning, I think the same way, I mean, universally, that education and learning and exploration and curiosity and creativity, you know, creativity gets, I mean, the Ken Robinson talk, that TED talk is perfect about that. That the way that the industrialized educational system is global. It's not just the US. It it values this mechanistic versus humanistic way of
Hmm.
learning and being and navigating the world. And I think at the end of the day, how do I want to navigate me, Ryan Erickson, and the world is that if to help people think less mechanically and more musically,
Hmm.
so to shift from the mechanist to the humanistic, the mechanical to the musical, just that shift. And I think if I can bend the arc of the people who I play with, then I would that would have been a good contribution to the world, I think.
So, so what are you doing now that allows you to do this as a vocation in your life?
I'm searching. I'm and yeah, I'm looking for meaningful work. I've had gig work over the past couple of years, and the way that the world changed around me, when I had cancer,
Hmm.
and it really hasn't changed back
Hmm.
in some ways. So I do a lot of several YouTube podcasts that I do with friends and folks that we talk about and amplify this new ways of being and consulting, education, kind of a lot of volunteer work is what I do, and attempting to find ways to feed the beast of the roof and the water and the food. So I'm looking for ways to teach people who wish to learn and be together
Hmm.
with this kind of work. And I have a gig also that I do with a nonprofit that a very dear friend of mine has established to do workforce development in Southern California. As uh, we're bandmates from a long time ago too. But the music in the world is kind of a vanguard. I'm writing a book, this music of work, and to try and articulate this kind of stuff in a way that will resonate, hopefully. And yeah, so coaching, consulting, having wonderful conversations with people like you who will hopefully help spread the word and sing the song of the music of work beyond.
What is it? What is a what would you say to say a local business person there in Cincinnati that that you met somewhere, you know,
Hmm.
at a coffee shop or somewhere, and they all of a sudden become very vulnerable in talking about their business, and
Hmm.
they know they need to change, but they don't know how to change. What would you say to them?
There is a contextual understanding that I would want to have about this person. If we've gotten to the place where they're being vulnerable about me, what are they afraid of? What is what's the fear? What would happen if you were more vulnerable
Mhm.
with the people that you care about and the people that you depend on
Yeah.
and that you are in this together with? How do you how do you want this? I mean, I would be very careful about going into the music too soon because that isn't not everybody wants to go there, or it can be too esoteric in certain ways.
Mhm.
But it's about, what are you seeing and feeling in your organization? Well, what is what's the collaboration feel like? What are you sensing? And and again, that's a very
Are your
that's
people
a that
are your people in tuned with one another?
are they in tune? Is it what if it's and I would the place I like to go is that if your organization was a piece of music, what would it sound like? Right? Would it sound like a high school marching band? Would it sound like 10 first graders playing recorder together? Would it sound like, the Vienna Philharmonic? Or would it sound like the Beatles? Do you want your organization to be the because you're never going to be the Beatles, right? The best you will ever be if you try to be the Beatles is a good Beatles cover band. You're
Yeah.
not going to be making the music that you want to make. And that, so I think where I would want to get is, who do you want? What is the change you want to make with this thing? What's the impact that you really want to have? If it is you, if you could do nothing else, do you want to be an imitation of that thing over there? Or do you want to be something that really means something? I think that's where I would want to go. I want to have the conversation that would lead to that. And
So
yeah,
it's sort of like taking the piece of music that you've been given, the the score, which is the
yes,
business, the structure of
right.
the score, and say we're going to improvise on this. We're going to change some things,
Mhm.
and we're going to elevate some voices in the choir or elevate some of
Mhm.
the instruments so we can see if we can get something new to emerge. And
Yeah.
I think that's what the great composers did. They were constantly changing, and even after they would publish, a piece of music, they would go back and change it. I heard
Yeah.
once. I don't know who the director was. The director said, "A film is never finished; it's only abandoned.
Yeah. That's
Book is never finished;
that's
it's only abandoned."
yeah, that's
Um,
true. Absolutely.
well, I appreciate you being on here. Let me ask you one more question, and I think
Sure.
what I like to ask, and it's kind of a going out thing. Uh, do you have hope for the future, or where do you find hope?
Abs I find hope in yes, the answer is a screaming, singing yes. And where and I'm kind of tearing up about it a little bit too. I find that hope in looking into someone's eyes and saying, I see you. I have grace for you. I want to know you, and I want to know your story. I believe that aside of all this crap that happens, all the stories that people tell each other in social media, blah, that if you and I can be in tune with each other and we can be together, I'm looking into your eyes and I want to know you. I want to know you in this room outside of everything else. And I think that people talk about scale. I don't care about scale. I care about growth, right? So if you and I can grow together and we can come to understanding, then there's a big chance that we can invite others into that. Just not like 50 at a time or 100, because at that level it becomes too abstract. One to one. one to one to one,
Yeah.
and little pieces of that. So my hope is in the togethering as opposed to the othering. It's coming together in small groups that can grow and be deeper in deeper harmony. What's
Yeah.
going on there?
Yes, I agree. Um, I have hope too. And it's and I think with that hope we need to search to find resilience at the same time. And that's where the hope finds not just its focus, but it's actually the fuel for resilience as we go through change. Well, Ryan, thank you very much for being here, and this has been very very fun. And I always enjoy talking with people about music, and I guess I am a musician.
Absolutely. And it is apparent that your love for music is there. And it's been a joy to be with you, Eddie. And can I call you Eddie? I did already, so I figured it's the
Yeah,
Eddie
sure.
podcast.
Yeah,
And I did. I didn't ask permission.
no, that's I like it, you know, and yeah, I tell kids, young kids, that they can call me Eddie. It's interesting. I know this is kind of a real aside. I go places and they want my name to put on the cup, like at a coffee shop, and I'll say it's Ed, and they say what? I say Eddie. Oh, okay. So I
Well,
have, yeah. There's
well,
a
you can imagine the trouble that I have putting my name on a coffee cup.
Yeah,
And I've learned to play a great game with it. So maybe that's for another time. But
that's good. Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you all for watching. And I hope you will go find a piece of music today and just sit and listen to it and allow it to touch you. Because if you can do that, then you may be able to go find someone to talk to, and that same music may resonate in some way that opens up the relationship you have with them. I mean, I think that's what we've been talking about, right?
indeed.
So we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.